Welcome to the stream. Welcome to the stream. Let me just check I'm good on here. Excellent connection. Okay. Thanks for joining the video. If you're joining us, hopefully some people can come in live. I mean, the time differences are pretty extreme between Europe and America, but you know, it's become clear to me recently that we can only live in two states. One's faith and the other's doubt. And the world lives in doubt. And because the world lives in doubt, it becomes cursed and cut off from God. But we can escape this by living a faith reality. And one is above and the other's below. Like Paul said, set your mind on things above. And if this is the case, if we're living in faith, then we'll be like Peter in Peter's trial in that parable where he wanted to go walk on water, and Christ said, "Come and walk with me on the water." And when the wind was contrary, i.e., he feared that he could sink and drown in the sea. This is when he began to doubt. Okay, he began to doubt, didn't he? So you had two things there. You had faith and doubt. One's above and the other's below. And this is very much how it is for the Christian. And some Christians might not even know that. They might name the name, but they might live in a doubt reality. You know, their faith might not be strong enough. Like Christ said, "O ye of little faith." Like the one who suffered persecution. You know, the seed sprung up, but it didn't have a deep root, and the sun scorched it and it wilted. This is the effects of doubt. This is what faith does. We could say many things with our speech, but it's ultimately our actions that are going to secure us as being inheritors of eternal life. And in such a case, let's talk about the Son and what sonship means and the relationship between the Father and the Son, because as we can see with sonship, the Son inherits from the Father. And so we have these clear terms that are given to us from what you could call Semitic or the Hebrew terminology and theology of Bible-based thought against this backdrop of creeds. You know, so basically coming around to it, I was doing some videos on the departure of Christianity from the Apostolic truth, which was in the first century, into like a second century corruption, or the beginnings of the corruptions of the churches, which you know, at first glance, if you were somebody with discernment, you might come into the thinking that most of the corruptions took place after the Council of Nicaea, which indeed they did, but ultimately a lot of the groundwork was laid in the second century, where they departed from the apostolic truth, and there was quite a lot of Greek thinking introduced into the churches, because many of the philosophers of the Greek world converted. You know, they did so immediately, like Dionysius the Areopagite. But you know, a real avalanche of philosophers and philosophical thought took hold of church thinking and practice. So, like in the description, the main topic in this video is going to be, what does it mean to say that the Son is the same substance as the Father? What does it mean? What does same substance mean? You know, we're talking about this. This is ultimately what underpins what's called Trinitarian theology, which is a self-contradictory doctrine about it's the same being with three persons, which is contradictory to Scripture. If we look at certain verses within the Scripture, like we've already mentioned in the past, like John 14:28, for example, where Christ says, "My Father's greater than I." So we're going to break this down also into three questions follow-up questions from the first one, which is, what does it mean the Son is the same substance as the Father? So the three questions, follow-up questions are: is substance individual and distinct, or is it shared and undivided? Okay. The second one is: does eternal origin imply divine sameness or only divine likeness? And the third one is: how did Greek metaphysics shape the doctrine of the Trinity? So, clearly everyone's talking about Trinity till the cows come home, ultimately because this doctrine is orthodox, is regarded as the true God of the Christian Bible, when in fact, if we start to look into it, it's anything but. So I was going to start here. This is a book I'm writing called Before the Bible, and it's basically a translation of the New Testament, which has removed a lot of the errors that we're talking about. Some of the errors of some of the Bibles that we have now, like the Joannean comma, which is 1 John 5, where it's a clear implant of Trinitarian church thought, and they admit themselves that this has been implanted and is not part of the original New Testament. So this is basically one of the few and many things that I have been doing in this translation. So I was going to start here with a very important conflict of theology between the Apostle Peter and Athenagoras, and we'll go into it. It's called the question of substance. So, as it's written here, in the post-apostolic period, Christian theology began to explore the nature of Christ's divinity in the relation to God the Father. Two early witnesses, the Apostle Peter, as depicted in the Clementine Homilies, and the 2nd century apologist Athenagoras of Athens, offer markedly different approaches to the concept of substance, which in the Greek is ousia, a term that would later define Orthodox Trinitarian doctrine at Nicaea. So now we're going to get into Peter's theology in the Clementine Homilies, which I regard as equal to Scripture. It's just not canon. Now, when you talk about canon, it's important to understand that the writers of those scriptures in the Bible did not compile the Bible. The writings are 1st century, whereas the compilation of the canon is 4th century. So this clearly has to play a part in how we judge between scriptures, how we look at the early church. Did they have canon? They didn't have canon. You look at Clement of Alexandria, he used many different books, which are now called apocryphal or supergraphical. But let's carry on. It says in Homily 16:16, Peter makes a sharp ontological distinction between unbegotten, which is God the Father, and the begotten, which is the Son, Christ. He argues that which is unbegotten cannot share the same nature as that which is begotten. The source of a being does not necessitate sameness in essence. Even if something issues from God, like the souls of men, it does not make them of the same divine substance. So remember, this is the Apostle Peter. Therefore the Son, though divine and from God, is not consubstantial with the Father. So here's the quote from Homily 16:16. What is begotten cannot be compared to that which is unbegotten. They cannot be called the same, nor can it be asserted of him who has been begotten that he is of the same substance as he who has begotten him. This view maintains strict monotheism by asserting that only the Father is truly God by nature. The Son is exalted but ontologically distinct. Okay, let's just check stream and come back to it. Okay, thanks for joining us, whoever's in the stream. If you want to ask any questions as we go along, feel free to do so. Athenagoras' Christology in A Plea for the Christians, chapter 10. So we had the Apostle Peter's stance on begotten and unbegotten and substance, and now we're going to go to so obviously that was from a Judaic apostolic point of view, and then the second one is a more philosophical Gentile 2nd century point of view. Okay, so writing in the late 2nd century, Athenagoras of Athens presents a more philosophically developed understanding of Christ as the Logos word. The Logos word, he states, the Word was not created in time, but existed eternally within God as part of his rational nature. So logikos in the Greek. Okay, the Word was not created in time, but existed eternally within God as part of his rational nature. Second point, the Logos was brought forth to be the agent of creation, but not in the sense of being made from nothing. Okay, because he comes from within God's essence, the Logos is of the same substance as the Father. So it's important to understand that this is way before Nicaea. This is one of the earliest Trinitarian thinkers that I could find. This is possibly around 150, 160 or 170 AD. So this is his quote in Plea for the Christians. From the beginning, God had the Logos in himself, and he came forth to be the idea and energizing power of all material things. Athenagoras' view anticipates the Nicene formula: the Son is eternally begotten, not made, and thus consubstantial with the Father. Okay, so we're on point 3 now. The core disagreement: what qualifies as substance? Peter argues that to be of the same substance, a being must be identical in origin, nature, and mode of existence, something only the unbegotten possesses. Whereas Athenagoras treats divine substance more like a shared rational principle, in brackets, akin to Stoic or Platonic logos. Okay, so it's important to understand that this idea of logos was already around in the Greek philosophical world, and even before Stoicism and Platonism, there was Heraclitus who talked about the logos as well, which was like 500 BC. So Athenagoras treats divine substance more like a shared rational principle, allowing for internal distinction within one being. The disagreement hinges on whether origin from God implies divine identity or merely divine derivation. Okay, so if you've come from a divine source and the source is the same, or you've come from a divine source and you have a unique identity which is not the same as the source, is what we're saying here. So here we go. Implications for later theologies. Peter's theology, if faithfully preserved in the Clementine literature, would have been excluded at the Council of Nicaea 325 under the term Arian or subordinationist. That is really important to comprehend that fact, that basically Peter the Apostle would have been excommunicated from the Christian church. That's just fact. If, like as it says in brackets, if that is his view, which I believe it was. Second point is Athenagoras' formulation, though lacking Nicene terminology, shows the philosophical path that would lead to Trinitarianism. This divergence reveals that the early church had no singular doctrine of Christ's substance and that post-apostolic thought quickly began reframing the gospel in metaphysical terms. The conclusion, two paths. Peter preserves a Semitic monotheistic framework, emphasizing the uniqueness of the Father and the subordinate but exalted role of the Son, whereas Athenagoras introduces a Greek metaphysical model that allows for inner distinctions within God. Both thinkers seek to honor the divinity of Christ, but they do so in fundamentally different ontological languages. One is apostolic and the other is philosophical. Their disagreement is not minor, it is foundational to how the Christian church came to define God. So again, another 2nd century philosopher convert to Christianity of the Church of Rome was Justin Martyr. People will probably be, scholars of Christianity will be familiar with the allegory he uses, which is it's called here the philosophy of fire. By the mid-2nd century, Justin Martyr offers another philosophical model to explain the divine relationship between God the Father and Jesus Christ. In Dialogue with Trypho, chapters 61 and 128, Justin employs an analogy of fire kindling fire. Okay. So I have already proved, this is the quote, I have already proved that he was the only begotten of the Father in all things, being begotten in a peculiar manner, word and power by him, and having afterwards become man through the Virgin, even as we see happening in the case of a fire. Dialogue with Trypho 128. The fire analogy that he uses says a torch can light another torch without diminishing its own flame. The second fire is distinct but shares the same essence. Okay, ousia again as the first. The second fire is distinct but shares the same essence as the first. This becomes Justin's way of expressing how the Logos proceeds from the Father, begotten and not made. Okay, this is a direct quote from chapter 61 of the fire analogy. He says, I have discussed briefly in what has gone before when I asserted that this power was begotten from the Father by his power and will, but not by abscission. So abscission means something being cut away from something else, or like leaves falling from a tree. As if the essence of the Father was divided, as all other things partitioned and divided are not the same after as before they were divided. For the sake of example, I took the case of fires kindled from a fire, which we see to be distinct from it, and yet that from which many can be kindled is by no means made less, but remains the same. So again, this is, proto-Trinitarianism before Nicaea thought regarding the sameness of the substance. So he's using one fire can create many fires, and they are the same, and they're not diminished. The substance is not diminished. So this passage reveals Justin's effort to defend the eternal generation of the Logos without implying division or diminution in the divine nature. It's a sophisticated defense against the subordination, but it also clearly reflects a philosophical reinterpretation of the Father and Son relationship, one absent from earlier Jewish Christian thought, such as that preserved in the Clementine Homilies. So we have the shift in theological framework. Justin, like Athenagoras, is not working within the Semitic prophetic worldview of the apostles. Instead, he introduces Stoic and Platonic philosophical categories to interpret Christ. So God becomes the eternal nous, or mind, or arche, source. The Logos is an emanation from this divine reason. The relationship is eternal yet hierarchical and based on shared substance rather than separate being. This is fundamentally different from Peter's theology in the Clementine Homilies, which insists on the absolute distinction between the unbegotten and the begotten, not just in title but in nature. Okay, so this is why this matters. The early Greek Christian apologists, including Justin and Athenagoras, were engaged in translating the gospel into philosophical terms familiar to their Greco-Roman audiences. In doing so, they may have introduced ontological frameworks foreign to apostolic teaching, shifting from the Hebrew emphasis on relational roles, like we were talking about Father, Son, to a Greek emphasis on substance and essence. This move eventually laid the groundwork for the Nicene doctrine of the Trinity, but it also marked a departure from the theology of Peter, a shift from relational monotheism to ontological unity. So we have here the Semitic versus Hellenistic views on substance and divine identity. So we have the concept in the first column, Semitic, second column in the Greek, in the third. So the view of God concept in the Semitic is God is one person, the singular I am identity is relational. But the Greek is God is one essence, the ousia, manifested in three hypostases. Okay, so that we have a difference here already. The Semitic is clearly very much within the monotheistic framework of God the Father is the true one God, whereas the Greek is sort of diverging into this one God manifesting as three and being the same. So substance or the essence is in the Semitic. The Apostolic is not emphasized as an abstract category, it's more focused on actions or roles, but in the Greek, the substance of the essence is key, and it is the ousia, being, the being and the nature used to define divine unity. The personhood in the Semitic is not a theological category. Names and functions matter, whereas in the Greek, the hypostasis is used to define three persons sharing one essence. The unity of God in the Semitic is functional and relational unity, in brackets, hear, O Israel. In the Greek, it's metaphysical unity, one essence in three. And again, in the Semitic, the language of begotten refers to time-based sonship or covenant roles. Again, going into what we're saying, sonship, he's the inheritor, he will be the king of the new world, etc. In the Greek, the language of the begotten refers to he's just eternally begotten, not created. Again, going into Greek metaphysics. Christology in the Semitic is Jesus as God's agent. He's Messiah, King, Servant, and Son. But again, in the Greek, it is rendered as Jesus co-eternal and consubstantial with the Father. Authority versus ontology. In the Semitic, it's the emphasis on authority, delegation, and roles. But in the Greek philosophical 2nd century view onwards, it's the emphasis on nature, essence, and ontology. And then lastly, approach to mystery. Mystery through history and prophecy in the Semitic. And in the Greek, the mystery is focused on a metaphysical paradox, which we started the video talking about, the contradiction, the three equal one. This is the only mystery within the framework of the Nicene Christian view. We kind of basically showed there the differences between the Judaic Apostolic Gospel and the Christian view that came to establish itself within Christendom and the churches from the second century onwards, going into the Council of Nicaea the creed that was written in 325, which meant if you didn't agree to this different philosophical based creed, you would be excommunicated from the church, as we proved in the case of Peter's views in Homily 1616, that he would have been hilariously excommunicated from his own church. So regarding this video, I think that's pretty much, you know, where I've concluded it, and how it comes down to is it's coming down to these questions of, is substance individual and distinct, or is it shared and undivided? And as we saw with Peter's view on 1616, Homily 1616, if we go back into that, it was basically saying that if you take the approach of man has come from the unbegotten God, but man is not the same substance as God, so that pretty much dismantles the argument of the Trinitarian theology immediately, in my opinion, because it's showing that source doesn't equal the exact source. Source only brings into being something that is individual, unique, distinct. There's complete differences. If everything that was to come forth from the Father was the Father, then man would be the Father also. But in the case of Trinitarian theology, this is a question clearly that is not. It's not, either not been put to it, or it's been ignored. So if I was to look for Homily 1616 again, okay, so I'd like to read really the whole of 1616, which will be in here somewhere. So if there's any questions on what we just read, or if you think that one view is more likely than another view, then you can tell us exactly what you think of that. Right, so I've found Homily 1616. I'll just check the stream before I read it. Okay, so let's read some questions first, then I'll go back into Homily 1616. Okay, Latin name, Servus Veritatis. It's very Roman. Is it correct to say that the Father, Son, Holy Spirit are all the same in all the 10 categories bar relation? Secondly, what denomination are you? And thirdly, loving the vid but gotta go to sleep, God bless. Okay, so he's come and gone. What are the 10 categories? This is probably in some kind of church creed or church framework that I'm unaware of. If I could come back and answer that or look into that at some other point. What denomination am I? I am non-denominal. I am definitely non-Trinitarian. If you want to sort of pigeonhole me, it would be born-again Christian. But I follow the doctrine of the early church in terms of, I'll look for the scriptures and prove that out of the scriptures what the early church, the earliest church, thought their doctrine, their didache was. I basically disregard anything post-Nicaea as heresy, and in a lot of my other videos I've gone through my statement of faith and my theology. I don't believe that there is a literal Sabbath day to rest on, for example, like Sunday or even Saturday. If you are born again and saved, if you go to Hebrews 4, it says today is the day of salvation, so that absolves any kind of literal day's rest. But also, if we look at some texts like Ignatius of Antioch to the Philadelphians, chapter 6, where it talks about heresies, those kind of things give us a good idea of what the early church thought about certain alien doctrines that were outside the church. But thanks for the comments, and come back when you can. But give us some comments later. I hope those answered your questions. In a nutshell, what I basically do on my channel is like a money changer. I'm looking at proving the true from the false, and basically what I do is open to your own input as well. If any of you want to put something forward, some certain doctrines, some scriptures, we can look at those in the videos. But I would say I'm quite different to a lot of other channels in that I'm not really tied down with a canon. I do accept the canon with exceptions here and there. Particularly, I believe that the manuscript that was used in the Acts of the Apostles was corrupted by Judaizing sects, and I reject some of the resurrection accounts where it says first day of the week. It's things like this. So, like on screen here, you can see my Google Docs with my own version of the New Testament that I'm going to release at some point when I can get it done. But ultimately what I'm trying to do is to evangelize and talk about the theology of the apostles and what the true gospel was before some of the corruptions occurred. So we were going to read quickly Homily 16:16, which is Peter. And the chapter title is The Unbegotten and the Begotten, necessarily different from each other, which is completely anti-Trinitarian. It's completely anti-Trinitarian. So if you can read a text and you can understand the text and what that text is saying to you, and then you can bring yourself to detach yourself from any kind of church-based doctrine, which for a lot of people that isn't possible. And I think a lot of it comes down to delusion and supernatural influence, shall we say. Like it says, the names of those who weren't written in the Lamb's Book of Life were given over to worship the beast, for example. So, if we read this, it says, this is Peter saying, in addition to this, it is the peculiarity of the Father not to have been begotten, but of the Son to have been begotten. But what is begotten cannot be compared with that which is unbegotten or self-begotten. And Simon said, so this is Simon Magus, if you don't know who he is, it's the same Simon the Sorcerer in Acts 8. Okay, Simon said, is it not the same on account of its origin? So it's kind of like an interesting question. He's basically putting a Trinitarian question to him. Is Christ not the same substance because he's come from the Father, right? And Peter said, he who is not the same in all respects as someone cannot have all the same appellations apply to him as that person. So that's an interesting reply, right? He who is not the same in all respects as someone cannot have the same appellations applied to him as that person. What I like to do on here is I kind of like to put in the definition of words. If my screen sort of glitches, just give it a minute. But I don't like to leave any words not 100% explained, because we get an exact understanding from an exact definition. It just means name or title. So he's saying, you know, he who is not the same in all respects as someone cannot have the same title applied to him as that person. So someone who's a king, if you're not the king, you can't have the title king, you know. And I suppose this is like the same with the father and the son. There's a succession between a king and a king's son. He's going to be the inheritor. We're going back to this idea of, you know, in allegories, what the relation between the father and the son, and how it's kind of made non-effect in this kind of Gentile second century sense. Simon said, "This is to assert, not to prove." This is to assert, not to prove. Peter says, "Why do you not see that if the one happens to be self-begotten or unbegotten, they cannot be called the same, nor can it be asserted of him who has been begotten that he is of the same substance as he is who has begotten him?" Okay, let's read that again. "Why do you not see that if the one happens to be self-begotten or unbegotten, that's the Father, they can't be called the same, nor can it be asserted of him who has been begotten, that's the Son, that he is of the same substance as he is who has begotten him." So they can't, according to the Apostle Peter, who was given the authority of the apostles, this is a total anti-Trinitarian standpoint and view. You can't reconcile this to Trinitarianism whatsoever. They cannot be the same substance, Peter's saying, right? Peter says, learn this also. So he's going on to explain himself as going to give an example as to why this is so. The bodies of men have immortal souls, which have been clothed with the breath of God. And having come forth from God, they are of the same substance, but they are not gods. But if they are gods, then in this way the souls of all men, both those who have died and those who are alive, and those who shall come into being, are gods. But if in a spirit of controversy you maintain that these also are gods, what great matter is it then for Christ to be called God, for he has only what all have? Okay, so what Peter's ultimately saying here is, what I was saying also in the video, is that Peter uses the example of the fact that the soul of man is eternal. It has come from God, but as we know, man is not God. Man is not God. Man is distinct in his identity. He's individual and distinct. He's not shared and undivided with God, is he? And again, with the other question, does eternal origin imply divine sameness or only divine likeness? So it is divine likeness, isn't it? We're made in the image of God. It's not divine sameness. We can't go and create an entire universe like God can create. So, and again, we can see that this Greek metaphysical approach to the Trinity, where Athenagoras says that Christ has come forth from God the Father, so he is God the Father. And Justin Martyr says, like, he uses the fire analogy where fires come from fire. With one big fire you can start many other fires, and it's all the same fire. But we can see this is a different view to the one that the Apostle Peter had, and we have to say that the apostolic primacy of Peter is the correct doctrine. We have to say that. You can't say that the Gentile churches, Justin Martyr in the Roman Church and Athenagoras in the Athenian Church, can take on these completely different and contradictory, paradoxical views on the Father and the Son, and then they're not going to be called heretics, because they are heretics. If you're going to change you could say, were these people privy? That's a whole other debate. Were these people privy to a text like the one we just read from the Clementine Homilies? And some of them weren't, because ultimately some of these texts that we have today were not freely available to all of these early Christian churches or whatever. But ultimately, the bishops who ordained these churches would have had quite a strong constitution, shall we say, like an apostolic constitution, which these churches were to follow, which over time became lost due to certain churches, like the Church of Rome, changing doctrines to suit the Greco-Roman world in which they lived. And we went into that, like with Telesphorus, the 8th Bishop of Rome, who changed the Passover. And these kind of things start to become clear, that there was a departure from what they call Jewish Christianity, which just means ultimately that when we refer to the term, in my opinion, like Jewish Christianity, it's to do with things like honouring the types, honouring the festivals, but only in a sense. The apostles did it only in a sense of the spirit of the law. They didn't do it in the sense of the letter of the law, which is carnal. But like Hebrews 9, that's the carnal commandment. Okay, so these are important things to understand. But for now, I think this video is pretty much wrapped up. If anyone wanted to leave a comment, please do. And I will come back with more videos in the future.